Hello, this is Mona Tanjev, past president of NCSM, and welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders, the Game Changer series. Join me and my co-host, John Sangiovanni, as we sit down and have conversations with emerging and established leaders about how they are changing the game in mathematics education. Gandhi said, we need to be the change that we want to see in the world. So listen as we talk to mathematics leaders who are being the change that they want to see in mathematics education. We will learn about their inspiration, perceptions, and of course, their game-changing actions. Mathematics leaders, we know that the status quo is unacceptable, so it's time to change the game. Hello, I'm Mona Tanchev, and welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders. John Sangiovanni and I are the co-hosts, and today we are starting a new series titled The Game Changer Series. We have two game changers with us today. We have Steve Leinwan and Eric Mailu. Dr. Steve Leinwan is a principal researcher at the American Institute for Research in Arlington, Virginia, and has over 40 years of leadership positions in math education. Steve is an author of several mathematics textbooks, books, and has written numerous articles. Steve has also served on the NCTM Board of Directors and is a past president for NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics Education. In addition, Steve Leinwan was the awardee of the 2015 NCSM Glenn Gilbert Ross Taylor National Leadership Award for outstanding contributions to mathematics education and has been awarded the 2021 NCTM Lifetime Achievement Award. So Dr. Eric Mailu is the professor of mathematics at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey for 25 plus years. He has also served 6 terms as the president of the Rowan University Senate from 2007 to 2013. He's also previously served as president of the Association of Mathematics Teachers of New Jersey and the program chairperson of the 2007 NCTM annual meeting. He has co-authored several books and was a recipient of the Max Sobel Outstanding Mathematics Educator Award in 2009. Eric was also the regional director for NCSM and was one of my mentors when I first started on the board way back in 2013. They are here today to discuss their newest book titled Invigorating High School Mathematics, Practical Guidance for Long Overdue Transformation. So welcome, Steve and Eric.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Mona and John.
Thank you too.
I'm excited for this conversation. So I'm going to dig into the first question we have for you guys, which is, tell us about how the two of you came together to work together on your new book, Invigorating High School Math, Practical Guidance for Long Overdue Transformation.
So since Eric gets the bulk of the credit, I will tell the story. We've sat in each other's presentations for years at local, regional, and national meetings. I sit in the aisle up front. Eric sits somewhere in the aisle toward the middle. I don't remember what presentation it was. I don't remember what conference it was. We're probably talking about 2 or 3 years ago. We realized that we were both saying that high school math is a mess. Eric had just finished talking about a whole bunch of ways to use 3-act lessons and other online resources to do a better job. And I had talked about how we had to make other kinds of changes in high school math. So we both believe that there are some real inequities in high school math. We believe that there are limited opportunities. We believe that there's an obsolete curriculum. We believe that there has to be more statistics, that there has to be more modeling. And so we said, let's do a study group and then do a conference, or let's do a study group and then write a report. And so it was really a brilliant idea. And we applied to one place and they said, well, this isn't going to work. We applied to a different place and they said, well, it's a really great idea, but it doesn't sort of fit into what we think is going to work. And then we dealt with a good friend at NSF and he essentially assured us that, he had like $100,000 to help us. What's so important about this is, so you get shot down and you get shot down and you get shot down. And what game changers do is they go, my idea is worthy of persevering. Well, in this case, I was ready to say to heck with it. We are now in May of 2020. The pandemic has closed everything down. I am now in North Carolina, and I'm helping with the homeschooling of my granddaughter, and I am climbing walls. I can't believe how much of my life has been canceled. And out of the blue, I get a text from Eric that says, so now that we've been shot down by all these people, why don't we just write a book? And it was like, duh. And so I said to him, awesome. You're right. I can't believe it. I'll take the outline, all that stuff. I'll write a table of contents tonight, send it to you tomorrow. Eric took it, and the very next day, because this has been our style, he shoots back a revision with what about this and how about this and change this. And we looked at each other and basically said, we can pull this off. These are the 5 chapters that I should and can do the first draft of, and then you'll fix it. And these are the ones that you can do. And so that's how we ended up with this book. And obviously, I have had a long history with Heinemann. And so we didn't screw around with any of that. We actually wrote by June the first 4 chapters and sent the entire thing off to our friends at Heinemann, and they said, wow, this is a go. And then, issues in the pandemic and staff changes and all, but that's how this came about. And I think it's a great story, primarily because you hit an obstacle, but you sit there and go, no, this is too important to just let go. And I got to tell you, I have had a long life of being a lone ranger. I am not a great collaborator. It is incredibly hard for me to collaborate. I had a bad experience collaborating where it just didn't work so well. This has been an absolute joy. The depth of my respect for Eric has only increased. And I think it's been mutual, and we have worked together like 2 sides of the same coin. And so, I tell people, you want to do something, get a soulmate, get a good friend, get someone that you can bounce ideas off of, and look at where we are.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you, Steve. And it's an honor to work with you. Let me just add one other piece here, is that, NCTM started the ball rolling with this back in 2016. Matt Larson's elected NCTM president. And Matt Larson made a very bold statement, and I'll quote him right here. Matt said, quote, "Today it seems as nearly everyone agrees that high school math needs to change. For far too long, high school math has not worked for far too many students," end quote. It's Matt Larson in 2016. And it takes a lot of courage for the NCTM president to come out there and say, high school math sucks. Okay, he didn't quite say it like that, but that's exactly how Steve and I would say it. Matt is very kind and politically correct. And then NCTM follows that up with a groundbreaking book of Catalyzing Change. And Steve and I both read those books, and we talked to Matt a lot, but we said we needed to go further. We needed to pick up where Catalyzing Change left off. Catalyzing Change was a really good start for what needs to be done in high school math, but it needed to go deeper. It needed to talk about curriculum changes, pedagogy changes, assessment changes, technological changes in detail. And that's what we tried to do in the book. And not only that, and also implementation guidance, a 5-year plan for high schools to make these changes, not overnight, but in 5 years. So that's just a little genesis of where we're coming from here.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eric. That really, helps us and our listeners wrap their heads around this. I have to ask one question before I get into some other questions we have for you. Steve, you said 4 chapters by June. When did you start? It sounded like you pumped out 4 chapters pretty quickly.
Started in May.
Yeah, just let me know.
We started in May, and
okay, I didn't hear that part.
Yeah, and we each wrote 2 chapters. I also did the introduction. And it just came, flowing out. But remember, the upfront material really was excuses. I mean, any of us can sort of capture what are the excuses that we all hear every time we work with high school teachers. The issue of the challenge is, well, we wrote all that in our proposals. So we really were able to adjust that. And so that wasn't really heavy lifting. I took, easy parts. And Eric took on the pathways stuff first, which was a much bigger reach. So that's how we were able to do it. And again, look, when we're talking about the pandemic. I mean, Eric was still doing some virtual teaching, but my whole life had shut down.
I was like, gotcha. So you guys were productive during the pandemic.
They weren't watching a lot of Tiger King, apparently, but
All I will say about the pandemic is, given that we were overseeing our granddaughter's distance learning and all, a 13 going on 14-year-old, the fact that we have birds and a bird feeder down in Durham, and we do not have any of that stuff in DC. The fact that I learned to cook vegan food and I can marinate tofu, not that I love it, not that I would do it for anyone but my, vegan, Orthodox vegan kids, and this book. And then I've been reading more than I've ever read before, but that's how I stayed sane. Otherwise, you could well imagine it could have been a problem.
I don't know that. Yeah, it probably would. We'll leave it at that. How's that sound? We'll leave it at that. So, Game Changers see challenges. They address those challenges. They see inequities as something you just mentioned. Our previous series was about inequities. And before we get into some other questions, could you share what is an inequity or some inequities that you see as prevalent or problematic in high school math?
Well, look very carefully. Just go back to Catalyzing Change. And the one sentence that jumps out in Catalyzing Change is just 3 words that just jump off the page in that book. And it says, tracking is insidious. Wow. The choice of words right there is just so powerful. NCTM said right there is that the most inequitable practice in all of high school mathematics is tracking. And not only will we call it inequitable, we'll call it insidious. And we really tried to build on that and say, look, we got to dismantle this practice. It's totally inequitable. We laid out in part 2 of our book about a common curriculum for all students. Again, Catalyzing Change talked about that a little bit. We laid it out in detail. What's a common curriculum with no tracking for all students in grade 9 and 10? We both believe firmly that it's an integrated curriculum like the whole world except for America. It's a 9th grade integrated curriculum. It's a 10th grade integrated curriculum for all kids. And in grades 11 and 12, it's not tracking. It's not Algebra 2 honors and Algebra 2 Part A and Algebra 2 Part B, which are just algebra slower and louder. It is not that. It is differentiated pathways that are equally rigorous. And by the way, we have a big problem with that word in mathematics circles today. It's what is rigor? Unfortunately, rigor is just calculus. Only thing that could be possibly rigorous in mathematics is algebraic factoring. And boy, is that a problem right there that we have to dismantle itself. But differentiating rigorous pathways, a calculus pathway, a statistical pathway, and a quantitative literacy pathway. Different mathematics that meet different needs for different kids, dismantling tracking and allowing kids to choose the proper rigorous math pathway for their career aspirations.
So, John, I think that question about what is a game changer is really critical. And, I think that the 4 of us are equivalent in the depth of our belief about the importance of NCSM, the way that NCSM by definition empowers people, the way in which it's themed of bold leadership. This requires bold leadership. And to me, a game changer is someone who has a vision and translate that vision into a story. My brother just retired as a Shakespeare professor at the University of Maryland, and I happen to be at his house tonight because my little brother is here and we're all going out for a really nice dinner this evening. But I left him a copy of this book. And he is very, very critical. I can begin to tell you what a Shakespeare scholar does with my stuff. But he said, I'm surprised at how forceful it is. I'm surprised that the fundamental message is empowerment. And I can take that as, I said that to him tonight, that I take that as a really high compliment that the voice that Eric and I achieved recognizes that a game changer creates and recruits for a vision by telling a compelling story. I believe, Eric believes that a game changer looks at the status quo and recognizes that it is imperfect and creates opportunities for change and for improvement. And so when the story says, we have all this technology and people are telling kids they can't use their smartphone or now a smartwatch in math class for reasons that I think are crazy. That's not cheating. The kids are doing what they will do for the rest of their lives. when we know that we're asking kids to do skills and mimic concepts that Desmos and Alexa and Google can do immediately. That's a story that people can relate to and say, yeah, I thought that, I felt that. When people realize that the fact that we do not have a retesting policy in most high schools in this country, that's malpractice, and you have to call it that. And the story sometimes gets a little edgy. The fact that there is such gross isolation, the fact that we tolerate that. And that's when I don't blame the teachers. That's when I blame the administrators and the department heads. That's when I blame the principals for not demanding. You know, I'm working in a school now where the teachers can opt out of coaching. Well, you know that I walk right into those teachers' classrooms. I don't care. Oh, I forgot. I didn't realize you were in 215. I thought I couldn't go into 213. And everyone knows I'm lying. But yeah, I mean, so to me, the game changer is obviously someone who takes some risks, but fundamentally recruits a few people, knowing that there's going to be pushback. But you have to recruit some other people and move from there. And it's really pretty strategic. And I think that you look at the implementation section in our book, it talks about fail fast, fail often. It says about have a discussion. It says build understanding. We talk about how if you don't bring the guidance counselors in, if you don't bring this to the Board of Education early on so they understand why that's going on, then it becomes really, really hard to be effective.
I want to dig into your brother's work, but that doesn't seem appropriate for tonight's podcast. So maybe next time. But
all right,
you set the stage for really this series: Game Changers Empower, Game Changers Recruit, Game Changers Recognize that the moment is imperfect. And that is a powerful takeaway of all of this. So thank you for that. Mona, what would you add?
So one, I had the privilege, I bought the book. And I had the weekend to myself, and I sat at a pool and I read for about 4 hours. And so the first 3 chapters are all about the excuses. And I felt that I was listening to conversations that I've had with high school educators over the last 15 years. It was like you were listening to my conversations as I was having, asking questions. A lot of things that I do is just, I'm like, well, why do we do it this way? Do we think about something different? So throughout the book, when I was reading, it talks about this long overdue transformation. And the book clearly speaks to changing the game of high school mathematics. Mm-hmm. So it was cool. It was cool. It sounds silly, but it was really nice to hear stories of schools where they've done things. Like there was examples of artifacts from some of the schools you guys have worked with. So as you guys were writing or your own experience, what was one of your most favorite nuggets or actions from the work that you've done with schools that have done some of this transition or transformation?
Eric, the examples that you built into the pedagogy and the assessment and the modeling and the technology chapters, I think all are things you're really proud of.
It's often hard to talk about changes in pedagogy that are long overdue in math education, especially in high school, on a podcast. I'll have to say that up front. But we all know that high school mathematics is still chalk and talk in America. And as much as we have changed K-8 mathematics for the better, the pedagogical changes in high school mathematics are still long overdue. We talk about that a lot, and we show a lot of examples in the book of how we have to engage kids into what I call experiences. Like just taking notes, whether the notes are now in a jazzed up PowerPoint or whether their notes are in guided note format, don't engage students in the 21st century when they can Google the definition of every word and Google the theorem and everything else, and all the content that you think you're giving them is available on Google. We have to change that pedagogy, that kids having experiences in math classes. And an experience is something that they can therefore recall the content from. So an experience, an engagement, we outline some of them in the book. And then maybe at the very end, oh, by the way, here are the notes. Here are the definitions if you didn't quite get them from the experience. But until we engage kids in mathematical experiences, and instead of continuing to treat them as just dumping knowledge into their brains that they can look up in Google, It's a fundamental shift that we have to think about. We do that not only for pedagogy, we have the shifts in pedagogy that we need to make. We have the shifts in assessment with tons of examples of what assessment looks like in the 21st century. Also, the key word there in assessment I like to talk about is that students are no longer consumers, but they're creators. Is that so often they're just consumers of knowledge, no longer when they can just look up everything on the internet. They have to be creators. And we talk about what the difference between a consumer and a creator is in the assessment chapter. We will break that down. And then the last two chapters in part 2 of the book, we'll look at technology, and we'll look at what I think is the overarching theme of all high school mathematics, which is math modeling. We've been saying that for years, by the way, that math modeling must permeate everything we do in high school mathematics. Dan Meyer has certainly taken the lead on that with his groundbreaking work on 3-act lessons. But what is modeling? How do we model? And examples of modeling in every single thing that we teach has to permeate the content.
I think what's so important is that we have to break out of the notion that once you have a book, once you have a curriculum, once you have your standards, once you have your units, you're done. And the question always comes down to not just what, but how. And so the part 3 of the book really gets at what should it look like. And we work really hard to include specific examples of what the lessons might look like. We have samples of what we think are high quality assessments for people to measure their own assessments against with a set of criteria. We have examples of the technology and how it can significantly enhance a lesson. And we have a bunch of examples of modeling so that you can't escape it. We're not just talking at people, but we're trying to be very specific. But when you ask about nuggets, I got to tell you, I think that there are bookends. When I finally had to read it like Eric did for the last go through from start to finish to make sure that the galleys were all fine, I was struck by the bookends of the first chapter that speaks to the challenges. The discussion there about how there has been inadequate guidance, how there has been, the Common Core, as we all know, has been wonderful K-8, but they all ran out of time. And the 9-12 Common Core has set us back 10 years because it didn't move things ahead in any way, shape, or form. And in some ways, it made things even worse. We know the professional isolation of the professional. And so I really love the way in which we've tried to say, hey, we share your pain. We understand that there are challenges. We understand that this is frustrating. We understand that no one is really happy with either the outcomes or the processes of high school math. And then I happen to really love the way in which I just spent a whole lot of time on pages 166 and 7 in the introduction to the implementation chapter 10. A whole lot of time with Michael Fullen and with all of the change literature. And I guess that if I was going to use this to support leadership, if I was going to go back and do a session at the NCSM Academy, for example, I would worry about helping people remember that there is no way around. Change takes time. We never give people enough time. Change begins with informed discussion, but too often the scope of change is imposed from on high. We need to recognize that if you ignore that, you're just wasting your time. Change takes careful planning, and that's why we've got all these tables. Change takes winning over colleagues and decision makers. Too often we just do a top down or a bottom up. I'm a great proponent of teachers, bootstrapping it and just doing it, but I understand that change of this magnitude, they're going to get killed by the public and all. So it has to be done right. Change requires mutual trust, a sense of collegiality, a shared purpose. And we know that that's beyond in too many cases, the typical math department. It's why one of the guiding principles is this whole notion of the department culture. Change requires careful monitoring. You got to be open to the fact that you fail and then you pick up the pieces. It's not perfect. It's not going to be great. If you can get 3 units in this integrated math 1 in a year and try them out and have to redo 2 of them, to me, that's a rousing success. So there are the nuggets that we turn people to.
And just want to add just a couple other important nuggets is that, we mentioned earlier about curriculum changes in grade 11 to 12, about quantitative literacy pathways or about statistical pathways. And I think one of the important things of the book is that there are people out there doing this. There's a great IDS course, Intro to Data Science, that came out of National Science Foundation. It's very popular in Los Angeles Unified Public Schools. And we show that resources. You don't have to start from scratch here. There are schools doing great work in statistical pathways. There's also great work coming out of quantitative literacy pathways, the work of the Dana Center at U Texas Austin. They're all out there and available. We list the resources. You can download the samples of alternative pathways for students. And those nuggets are important. That we want you to change the game. We want major change in high school, but we have a 5-year implementation plan, and we will provide the resources in the book to help you do it.
That was something that was really important as I was reading through it, as I was thinking about some of the schools that I'm working at and wondering, they in the book, there are prime examples of what it looks like. And even though some of the other series you guys mentioned, or textbooks or books you guys mentioned earlier on of like where this work started, it was very theoretical. Whereas what I'm hearing you describe is more practical. Like here are some examples of what it looks like in this school, or here are some other examples. So I think that's really important for future readers of the book to understand that it's not that you're just saying, hey, go do this. You're saying, okay, so here's what we want it to look like, and here's how you can get there, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and practical means doable to me. Steve, you just mentioned the guiding principles, and that's going to get us to our next and probably our last question. But it also makes me think about what Eric was sharing, and that we all know that this is long overdue. But getting started can be overwhelming. And that's even without those, thinking about outside factors or other challenges outside of the schoolhouse. So in the book, there are 14 guiding principles to invigorate high school mathematics. Yep. What advice do either of you have for leaders about where they might start, where they might dig in?
So let me take the lead on this one. One of the things that I'm proudest of is I got a copy of Jeff Kral's Necessary Conditions when it first came out, and read the book and just loved it. And I sent an email off to Tracy Zager Johnson and to Jeff saying, Chapter 5 is unbelievable. Chapter 5 captures what ought to be happening in every single high school math class. And it's time that you just release it as a loss leader. And you may or may not know that they did that. They said, good idea, and it's no big deal. It has now become, in a sense, standard operating procedure at Stenhouse and at Heinemann now to take a chapter and release it. So Eric and I didn't have to think for half a second when we said, and by the way, chapter 14, it's now available to anybody. It's all free for a download. It comes in, it looks just like this. It's just beautiful in all of its colors and all the examples and all that stuff. And so I think that the starting place is our math department needs 2 hours, and we need 2 hours with food. We need to be treated like professionals. We need to get out of just a regular department meeting that we rush in and rush out. We have a department meeting where we are, in a sense, required to read or at worst skim these 20 pages before the meeting. And then I think that the discussion questions with a reasonably competent moderator or facilitator of these 14 domains, which ones do you think your department comes closest to meeting? And which ways is that there? I want to start with what's positive. I want them to say, hey, we've come a long way with technology, and we're really making a good use of our interactive whiteboards, and we've changed some of our lessons. I think that, in fact, we do have some collegial infrastructure. We do actually sit in each other's classes, but you know what? We have not codified a vision. We just sort of do our own thing. We really have not done anything with integration. Our curriculum is still. And so which ones are you doing? Start there. And then which ones do you think your department is furthest away from meeting? Which ones? I start there because I don't think you start with the ones that are furthest away. You've identified the two places where you've got a strong thing and where you're not going to tackle it in the first year. And that leaves you with 3 or 4 or 5, and that becomes either course committees or department committees or individual assignments for what is the status, what can we do this year, what can we do next year? And I think just that starting point of using these 14 domains of invigoration, knowing what it says in there, that you cannot possibly do all 14. And it's absurd. I think that the magic word is 2 or 3. Or you have 2 different groups with 2 here, 2 here. You look at 4 of those things, recognizing that you're ignoring 5 for the first year, and that in that sense, you own the process. It doesn't have to be facilitated by an outside person. But I think that we know that there's enough research to suggest that sometimes an outside person, a critical friend, can help that process along. But in lots of places, there's not enough money for that. People are afraid of it. And so this is me and Eric playing critical friend and saying, here it is, now go and work with it.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on that, as we end the book, we again talk about a 5-year implementation plan. And we talk about that first year. The first year of implementation has nothing to do with implementing anything. That first year is just a year of study, a year of reading, and a year of building what we're going to do, building a consensus of what we need to do, an analysis of our current conditions, a review of relevant literature, and building consensus on where and how to begin. And that totally starts with those 14 principles in chapter 3 that we have totally released for free on the Heinemann site. It starts there. The whole year is nothing more than an analysis of review and building consensus. Then and only then can we move forward to year 2 with an initial implementation and much more intense planning of the next 3 years.
So I'd love to sort of tie this up a little bit. I'm actually trying to find something that I tweeted this afternoon. Because this free time, which is a joke, but I'm reading about the new normal, and I just find that expression to be incredibly off-putting. New is off-putting for one set of reasons, and the worst thing that can happen in this society is that we return to some kind of normal. And so I spent about an hour just Googling around on new normal and alternatives to new normal and picked and chose from different places. I tweeted to something that Shelby Cole tweeted about, we're not going back to normal. And I wrote, amen. Yep. The new normal isn't the answer or the hope. Instead, it's smarter, greener, fairer, more equitable conditions for many, many more. And high school math reform, like we're talking about, is fundamentally about those aspects. Fair, more equitable. We are talking about a richer curriculum for all of the non-honors kids, a more relevant curriculum. We're talking about breaking out of the absurdity of Algebra 2, pre-calculus, calculus in important ways. We even have this radical notion that you don't have a problem anymore if you don't have to put kids in 8th grade algebra to ensure their parents that they'll get into calculus, because we don't believe you need to have algebra 2 and pre-calculus. We think that because we've moved so much algebra to 8th grade and you have a solid integrated course in 9th grade and 10th grade, that you can have a combined rational, forget the polynomials, forget the trig identities, and do the critical algebra 2 pre-calculus in a coherent whole that leads you direct to calculus. And we're seeing that in more and more schools. That's equitable. And so it's less tracking, and it's this common 9 and 10, and it's our plea for using the resources available to support what everyone is talking about, and that's the most important issue of all. We close our classroom door and give people the tools and the understanding and the coaching to provide more equitable teaching. And I think that, what's so neat about some of the stuff, but it's also covered better in other materials, is when all is said and done, less tracking, more equitable teaching means differentiation. And differentiation is one of those horrible words bandied around in our profession that most administrators write on evaluation forms and couldn't do it, model it if their lives depended upon it. But we all know that differentiation means that there are 26 different brains in your class. They are processing it in 4 or 5 different ways, and they are seeing it in 4 or 5 different ways. Differentiation means who saw it differently, who can show me a different picture, who can show me a different whiteboard, who did it differently, how did you approach it, how did you approach it? That is the essence of less is more. What great teachers have been doing since I first watched Dick Brown teach at Exeter 150 years ago is he differentiated naturally by saying, who did it differently? How else could we visualize that? He did 4 problems when everyone else was doing 10 and 12. That's the hope and the vision. That to me is the essence of equitable teaching. And so it's, you hear our excitement about all of our years in this business. And we've been able to, have the luxury, have the privilege of putting this together and hoping that people find it a useful tool. But that's it. It's a tool. It's not all the answers. We end where we begin. Eric said it so clearly that it is a manual to study and plan from.
I like to end. I always like to get the last word in on Steve.
Yes, I love it.
And I like to end with, it's just a completely rare agreement that NCTM, the Math Association of America, and the American Mathematical Association of Two-Year Colleges, AMATYC, that all these organizations have put out publications in the last 5 years with the exact same phrase. And the phrase is, the status quo is unacceptable. The status quo is unacceptable in high school math, NCTM says. MAA says in a book called The Common Vision that the status quo is unacceptable in collegiate mathematics. And APMAT says the same thing about the status quo in 2-year community college mathematics. It is completely rare for all 3 of these organizations that use that verbiage. The status quo is unacceptable. We need to make changes. The time is past due. Let's do it.
And this is how you change the game, right?
What a nice.
Yeah, this is how you change the game. We've got to change the status quo. And for math leaders, it's one thing at a time. Like I appreciate how you guys are saying that you can't do it all in 1 year. That this is the long game, right? Like you're going to have these conversations with multiple people, with all your stakeholders, and that's how you change the game, one conversation at a time. So first of all, I just want to say thanks to both of you for participating in our very first series on Game Changers. And I appreciate your insight, and I'm looking forward to finishing the rest of the book.
Agreed. Thank you both. Thank you for your work, your contributions, and your time.
It goes both ways. I mean, you know that Eric and I are both amazing fans of both you, John, and you, Mona, the work that you've done inside the organization, outside the organization. And, I just look at this screen or I listen to these 4 voices, and what I see is people who are just committed to helping our colleagues serve kids better, serve teachers better. And, I'm 72. I'm older than all of you. And it just continues.
Together.
It's just how most.
Oh, that's mean, Eric.
No comment, Eric.
I should never have done that.
Door open.
All right.
Thank you for that, Steve.
Look at this bookshelf.
We hope you have been inspired by this bold mathematics leadership conversation and will tune into our podcast series each month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. You can learn more about NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics Education, and our upcoming professional learning events on the NCSM website at mathedleadership.org. You can also follow NCSM on Twitter at mathedleaders using the hashtag NCSMBold. Thanks again.